Good afternoon, everyone. Um, it's incredible to be here for a lot of different reasons. Not only because I get to meet so many amazing authors and share a stage and dialogue with people I admire, but I live in Chicago, so coming to LA this time of year is really a big pleasure. So thank you for having me and allowing me a moment to talk about this book, which I wrote during the pandemic, and in some ways it's about the pandemic, but not really. In many ways, this is a story of 20 years being at the bedside, trying to make sense of waves of my neighbors, everyday people coming to me sick and broken simply because they were trying to live. I tell the stories of the folks, of being there. For my entire career, 20 years now, and really 40 years before that, we've had extensive understanding of our inequities, our low quality care, and we spend $4 trillion a year on healthcare. Why is that? Why is it that I work in the state's busiest trauma center? Young black men are perforated full of holes and splashed on the concrete every day, and their bodies are rolled into statistics that get disseminated on the news. No longer individuals, now in aggregate. Why? Over time, I've learned that our bodies reveal the truth about society and each of our place in it. This book shares what thousands of people's bodies have told me over the years about themselves and about America. And through medical school, public health school, working in the first term of the Obama administration on healthcare reform, and in 20 years of practice subsequently, I've worked really hard to be part of the solution, and yet year over year, I'm often trapped as part of the problem. And while I tell this story in the moment of COVID, and from the fabled and notorious South Side of Chicago, which is my home, this is actually a story as big as America and as timeless as humanity. A couple months ago, I was in the emergency department taking care of patients. My shift starts at 6:30 in the morning, and the first patient I went to see was a young woman whose voices from schizophrenia were getting louder and louder. She was unable to take the medication she'd been prescribed for various reasons. And I went in to meet her, and when I looked at the chart, I realized she'd been there since 10 o'clock the night before. She knew she was decompensating, had this happened before, needed a different medication. I consulted the psychiatric team. We created a plan. We'd get her admitted, restabilized. Easy. On to the next patient. Throughout my shift, I get to go home at 2:30. I come back the next morning at 6:30 in the morning. She's still in that bed. She hasn't showered. She hasn't eaten. And she hasn't gotten the medications that were prescribed for her. It wasn't even clear when she'd get that bed that we'd ordered the day before. And I experienced that familiar feeling of emptiness, of helplessness. Another example of the same healthcare system that I'd always seen. When my patients are trapped and unable to get the care that they need, and here I am right beside them, trained to deliver care and unable to. We're trapped together. It's familiar. I've worked in this system that's mandated to serve everyone, but too often rejects and defers, delays, denies, bankrupts everyone who seeks care, but actually not everyone. In that same system, I've seen miraculous cures. Some people get the best care in the world. Why do we have these two separate things happening within these same emergency departments? The fact that they're existing simultaneously isn't an accident. It's actually the silent transfer of the length and quality of lives from poor to rich and from black to white. In the book, I tell a little bit about the journey that led me to that bedside. Before I'm a physician and a new author, I'm a son and an uncle and a brother and a neighbor. I'm rejuvenated by the wonders of nature and warm days in the middle of winter. And I'm a descendant of the people who were enslaved in the American South, who migrated north and became middle-class strivers. I work on the south side of Chicago, the same community where I grew up, and that makes that woman's predicament who is trapped in my emergency department that much more intimate and more infuriating. I mean, in her, I see my neighbor, my sister, my classmates. As a middle-class kid on the south side of Chicago, my neighbors were more likely to be poor. I experienced worse schools and had fewer healthcare options than even some of the poor white folks in the neighborhood. My parents arrived in 1970, which was at the end of the train migration north, chronicled in Isabel Wilkerson's Warmth of Other Suns. At the time they arrived, it was about at the end of when 500,000 folks had come to the area. It was also soon after the 1969 Gautreaux versus Chicago Housing Authority ruling that outlawed race-based public housing. But by the time my parents got there, it was too late. There were already 1 million people in public housing, scattered almost exclusively on the south and west side in Chicago's black neighborhoods. Those who weren't in public housing were sort of cordoned off by restrictive covenants and redlining, and those who escaped that were pushed into segregation with violence. Policy decisions, not accidents, created the segregation we exist in Chicago, shaped the lives of my patients and my own. And Chicago remains the third most segregated city in the nation. I'm dating myself, but in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up was when the drug war was launched. And it was then that men in black Chicago were being shackled and pushed out of the workforce and out of our communities. These communities were under pressure from all sides. Predatory lending was robbing families of their wealth and their houses, leaving neighborhoods cluttered with abandoned buildings and closing schools because they now have low attendance, and directing meaningful investments out of the south side into the north side. Despite all that, we had community, we had love. I went to school, I played Little League. We had political, social, cultural power. Dr. Adams was my Howard-trained pediatrician. Dr. Perry was my black dentist who went to the University of Illinois. I had a black mailman, butcher, repairman. We had each other, and we needed to, because that's all we had. There were saints and heathens, scholars and conspiracy theorists. It was the full range of normal humanity in that clustered South Side. And that same South Side that trained me tuned Mahalia Jackson's voice and guided Lorraine Hansberry's pen and launched Michelle Obama and her husband to the White House. As a young person in that segregation, I glimpsed something, but I didn't know exactly what it was. But it pinned folks into place and accepted our tax dollars while disconnecting our services. It was a quiet transfer of these shared resources, these tax resources, from the South Side to the North Side. And in that time, I was learning what it meant to live in America as a black man. I was experiencing what it meant to be in a caste system on the rung where our bodies were a part of the production function and used to balance budgets. Fast forward to 2020. It was just yesterday, but really a long time ago. We watch for pandemics in the emergency department because they come to us first. It started as a glimmer on Twitter in Asia, something about a respiratory virus. Then the next thing you know, Italy was closed. Hospitals were full. Then it hit New York, and we were braced in Chicago. By March, the NBA closed, and then everything closed. At that time, if you remember, we were washing our mail, but not wearing masks. I mean, we didn't know what we were doing. In the ER, it started out with just a few people coughing and sniffling, and then we got a deluge. We didn't have refrigerator trucks stacked with bodies like New York, but we were busy. Our nights were full of worry, and our days were wrapped in plastic, breathing through filters. It was a hard time. Those shelter orders pushed some people home. The people who had the best jobs kept them. They were able to stay home while essential workers delivered their goods and needs. Those who were deemed essential, like myself, tended to be at risk. They were disproportionately lower income folks. They were stacking shelves and nursing, butchering meats, even without PPE. They were on the south side with me. And then after they left home contracting the virus, they went home to their multi-generational homes and gave their loved ones the virus. While it seemed random, in fact, society had sorted us again. And in the first year of the pandemic, Black Chicagoans were 42% of COVID deaths, twice the rate of white Chicagoans, who were 22%. In just weeks, COVID revealed how society keeps us well or makes us sick. And like the old proverb said, when America catches a cold, Black folks caught pneumonia. Our communities define our social networks, the food we eat, our wealth, education, employment, housing, all of the inputs and resources that shape our bodies. And so a map of Chicago's segregation is also a map of its educational attainment, its wealth, and its social status. And this same city forces Black folks to endure a gauntlet of health risks, jobs that maim, food that sickens, water that poisons, guns that kill. And then when they fall ill, there are few places to go to receive care. And so they come to me in the emergency department, the only place required in the healthcare system to care for everybody, regardless of their ability to pay. This isn't about broken systems. It's not about heroes and villains. This is about systems designed to achieve exactly what they have. And we in medicine see the toll of this inequity more than anyone else. While Black people make up 31% of Chicago's population, they comprise 80% of those shot and killed, 800 people in 2021. In Chicago, we find children with the highest blood lead levels. Women deliver low birth weight babies 3.5% of the time, just blocks from my hospital on the south side, and only 1% of the time on the north side. And men who live in Inglewood, just blocks from where I practice, have a life expectancy of 59 years, compared to 90 years in Streeterville on the north side. White folks on the north side live long, disease-free lives, while Black folks on the south side face shorter lives full of disability. And these are not simply happening side by side, they're linked. If we hope to fix this, it will come from your students. We have to accept that life isn't siloed into biology or sociology, policy or health, but that we are woven together as one, and in those statistics are people. I need young people to see what I see at the bedside. And so in this book, I bring them there with me and introduce them to my patients. And to those moments where our bodies fall ill, as we all will, we only get out of this one way. And they realize that when healers and sick come together in these moments and connect beyond ego and status, we touch these things that are most intimate and human. And it becomes obvious that our bodies are the most precious endowment that we have. The vehicles that allow us to love and hope and transcend. We have to protect each other. And it makes it even more pressing that we fix this society that makes some ill in order to keep others healthy. In the end, whether we're a patient or a caregiver, there's no way to remain pure. We're all enrolled in this same society. We're all implicated. And there's so much work to do. We need to imagine a country that's never existed and set about creating it, even if it takes generations. Thanks for having me. Onward.